On March 3rd, U.S. President Donald Trump delivered a stark message. They have no navy. It's been knocked out. This declaration came after 2 intense days during which Iran's naval fleet was completely devastated. Iran had challenged the U.S., but that proved to be a grave miscalculation. Bombs and missiles rained down relentlessly, wiping out Iran's entire fleet in just 48 hours. This represents a catastrophic loss for Iran, and the situation is only expected to deteriorate further for a regime that appears to be unraveling right before our eyes. It all began after initial American and Israeli strikes targeted and eliminated a substantial portion of Iran's leadership. In retaliation, Iran launched attacks on multiple U.S. military bases. In response, the U.S. declared, "We acknowledge your base strikes, and we will answer by destroying your entire naval fleet." What followed was a swift operation involving us Tomahawk missiles that completely overwhelmed Iran's naval defenses and strategies. The outcome was stark. Iran lost 11 warships plus several attack submarines. This unleashing of overwhelming firepower by the U.S. sent an unmistakable message to Iran's faltering regime. Any aggressive move by Iran will trigger a far more devastating American counterattack. We'll delve deeper in a moment to explain exactly how the U.S. managed to cripple Iran's entire navy in such a short time frame. But first, let's consider the impact more closely. In just 7 words, the situation is clear. The Gulf of Oman has been emptied. This assessment came directly from the U.S. Central Command, or CENTCOM, which took to X, formerly Twitter, to publicize their achievement in just 2 days. Where, 2 days prior, Iran had 11 ships patrolling the Gulf of Oman, today there are none. CENTCOM also highlighted Iran's long history of harassing and attacking international shipping in this vital waterway, and proclaimed that such days are now over. This statement hints at the deeper reasons behind America's targeted strike on Iran's navy, which we'll explore shortly. But the immediate takeaway is that some of Iran's most significant warships have been neutralized mere days into the conflict, effectively annihilating Iran's naval presence overnight. And we don't have to rely solely on CENTCOM's reports. Satellite images have already surfaced, providing shocking visual evidence of the destruction wrought by the U.S. strikes. One prominent example is the Macran, Iran's first forward-based ship. Naval news reports that it was hit while docked in Bandar Abbas. Originally an oil tanker, this massive vessel was converted into a military ship capable of supporting helicopter operations, with a displacement of 120,000 tons, making it one of the largest ships in the Middle East. The satellite photos reveal fires blazing on its berth and thick smoke pouring from the center of the vessel. Another casualty was a Macran-class corvette, stationed at a pier in Chabahar. Equipped with anti-ship, surface-to-air missiles, and torpedoes, the corvette was a crucial component of Iran's naval strategy. There are 6 such vessels in Iran's fleet, but at least one is now incapacitated at the Khan naval base, emitting smoke as a grim testament to its destruction. The list of damaged and destroyed vessels continues, painting a dire picture for Iran's sea power. The scale and precision of the U.S. strikes have left Iran's navy shattered, marking a historic low point for Tehran and signaling a decisive shift in control over these strategic waters. Satellite imagery captured by Planet Labs reveals a stark scene in the Bandara base region, where at least 11 of Iran's warships were docked as recently as February 22nd. Now this area is engulfed in thick, black smoke, a grim aftermath of America's intense bombing campaign. Among the wreckage, remnants of the Macran are clearly visible in photographs shared by The Telegraph. However, the most significant blow was sustained by Iran's premier warship, the Shahed Beri. Often described as Iran's closest equivalent to an aircraft carrier, the Shahed Beri has been central to Iran's mobile drone power. Nicknamed by some as a mothership, this vessel has been instrumental for Iran in launching drones against US bases and Gulf countries since the US initiated its campaign against Iran. Interestingly, both the Iris Macran and the Iris Shahed Beri began their lives as commercial vessels before being converted into warships by Iran. This transformation perhaps sheds light on why Iran's navy hasn't had the strength or sophistication the regime might have desired. Over the past 48 hours, what we've witnessed is a stark demonstration of how purpose-built military weapons can devastate commercial ships converted for warfare. The UK Defence Journal further highlights that the Iris Shahed Beri was modified not only for drone operations, but also to launch and retrieve helicopters, amplifying its threat level far beyond just drone capabilities. Yet now, this formidable warship is lost. One might say, as Cappy Army's Riley noted in his coverage, that it represents the first aircraft carrier sunk since World War II. Though this comparison might be a stretch, especially when juxtaposing the Iris Shahed Beri with American giants like the USS Abraham Lincoln, which has played a pivotal role in this conflict. The loss remains significant. It marks a major setback for Iran's naval strategy, particularly its tactic of using drones against US bases and vessels. For Iran, already reeling from the damage, the question would have been, how could it get worse over these devastating 48 hours? Sadly for Tehran, it did. The Telegraph reports that US forces have largely destroyed the headquarters of the Iranian naval fleet at the port of Bandar Abbas. In addition, Ali Shamani, an admiral within Iran's elite Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, was killed in an Israeli airstrike. The consequences are stark. Iran has lost its entire fleet in the Gulf of Oman. Its naval headquarters lies in ruins, and one of its top admirals has been killed. This isn't just a bad day for Iran, it's a historic blow. For Iranians of a certain generation, this moment likely evokes a strong sense of déjà vu day. Iran has been in this position before, watching helplessly as the US crippled its entire fleet. This current chapter feels reminiscent of Operation Praying Mantis, though with some major twists that demand explanation. To provide some context, during the late 1970s and into the 1980s, Iran frequently confronted the US. The year 1979 was notable when Iranian revolutionaries took 52 Americans hostage, holding them captive for 444 days. The US responded with the Desert One rescue mission, a desperate attempt that ended in catastrophic failure, resulting in the deaths of 8 US servicemen. Let's take a step back and revisit some pivotal moments in US-Iran naval history to fully appreciate the recent developments. In 1983, a tragic event unfolded when an Iranian suicide bomber claimed the lives of 241 US Marines and sailors in Beirut. That was only the beginning of a series of humiliations in the Middle East for the United States. Fast forward 4 years to 1987, when the Iraqi Air Force attacked the USS Stark, resulting in the deaths of 37 American sailors. The tension escalated until April 18, 1988, a day marked by Operation Praying Mantis. This operation was swift and decisive. Within hours, the U.S. destroyed 2 Iranian oil platforms, a missile boat, 2 frigates, and 3 armed speedboats. The impact was devastating. Half of Iran's navy was crippled. This blow was unprecedented in modern times, hitting a navy that traces its origins back over 2,500 years to the First Persian Empire. Now consider the phrase, "the worst blow in modern times." That's significant. But what just transpired to Iran's navy goes even beyond that. Older generations of Iranians are likely experiencing a sense of déjà vu, remembering the shocks of the past. Yet, they're also grappling with a pressing question. How did such a devastating attack occur again? especially when Iran has been meticulously preparing for this kind of conflict ever since Operation Praying Mantis. That pivotal day in 1988 triggered a complete overhaul of Iranian naval doctrine. The goal was clear: never again endure such a humiliating defeat. Iran devised a strategy centered around overwhelming American naval forces with swarms of fast attack boats, as military analyst Cappy Army explains. Their plan included launching land-based anti-ship missiles at US vessels and ambushing them with submarines. Recognizing that they couldn't match the US in direct naval firepower, Iran developed a layered asymmetric approach. This strategy anticipated their fast attack boats darting in and out of missile range, striking quickly then retreating. All while Iran's submarines and missile systems pounded US assets. However, the reality of recent events proved starkly different. Despite years of preparation, Iran's strategy faltered. The US did not follow the playbook Iran expected. Instead of the familiar naval battle Iran's doctrine was designed for, the US struck with tactics that caught Iran off guard. Before we delve further into how this unfolded, a quick reminder: if you appreciate deep military insights like this, subscribe to The Military Show, where we analyze such developments in detail every week. So, what was Iran's Achilles heel during the US's intense 48-hour naval blitz? Simply put, Iran never anticipated the specific tactics the US employed. Their doctrine, conceived in the 1990s to neutralize threats reminiscent of those in the late 80s, was rendered obsolete. Iran was geared for ship-to-ship combat, where their fast attack boats could shine. They anticipated confining US naval vessels to constrained waterways like the Strait of Hormuz, making them vulnerable targets for their missiles, torpedoes, and drones, launched from makeshift aircraft carriers. By 2026, however, the US was well aware of Iran's plan. Utilizing persistent drone surveillance, coupled with advanced intelligence measures, the US effectively neutralized Iran's expected moves before they could be executed. This unforeseen approach shattered Iran's naval strategy, exposing the gaps in their decades-old doctrine and delivering a blow far surpassing Operation Praying Mantis. The United States possessed intelligence that allowed it to track the locations of Iran's boats constantly. Iranian warships never managed to approach the US vessels deployed in the Persian Gulf, as military technology has progressed significantly since the 1990s. Much to Iran's surprise. Alongside advancements in technology, American naval strategy had also evolved. In this imbalance, Iran showed up to a gunfight armed with a knife, only to be met with unfaltering defiance from the US while America refused to engage in fast boat skirmishes. Instead, their plan was straightforward yet devastating. Obliterate Iran's naval fleet with Tomahawk missiles launched from such great distances that Iran's entire naval strategy remained confined within port walls. During Operation Praying Mantis, the US utilized anti-ship missiles that Iran anticipated. However, by 2026, the scenario intensified during Operation Epic Fury, when the US unleashed Tomahawk cruise missiles against the Iranian Navy. These missiles boasted a standoff range far beyond what Iran expected, enabling American warships and launch platforms to strike without ever approaching Iran's vessels. A notable example was the destruction of the Iranian ship Macran, which fell victim to this strategy. Tomahawks slammed into the ship in rapid succession, overwhelming the Iranian defenses before they had a chance to respond. It's likely that these missiles were launched from Arleigh Burke-class destroyers. Ironically, the very class of ships Iran expected to face up close in combat with its fast attack boats. With a range around 1,600 kilometers, or roughly 1,000 miles, these Tomahawks reached their targets well beyond the sight and reach of Iranian naval forces. Iran had anticipated direct engagements with American warships to execute its doctrines, but instead was met with a barrage of lethal missiles. The Iranian Navy sank without even sighting the warships that fired upon them. The U.S. didn't stop there. According to Max Afterburner's analysis of America's explosive 48-hour campaign, as Iranian vessels hemorrhaged damage from Tomahawks, F-35 fighter jets moved in with precision strikes, likely deploying G-down bombs to finish off remaining targets. This layered approach was tactical genius. It dismantled Iran's expectations by launching strikes from afar, then closing in to inflict decisive damage when Iranian defenses were already shattered. Rather than engaging in a traditional naval battle, the U.S. conducted a demolition campaign against a force designed specifically to counter tactics that the U.S. never planned to employ. In just 2 days, America invalidated every Iranian naval tactic. As noted by the U.S. Naval Institute, U.S. had prepared extensively for Iran's asymmetric naval threats over the years, culminating in this devastating offensive. Iran had long flaunted an irregular naval force comprising missile submarines, naval mines, and anti-ship missile batteries, even threatening to close the Strait of Hormuz in previous years. But American naval forces in the region were ready to counter such moves with overwhelming force and cutting-edge technology. Let's dive into the recent developments involving the U.S. Navy's response, including the deployment of Hellfire missiles from Seahawk helicopters aboard the USS Abraham Lincoln. As highlighted by US Naval Institute, the focal point here is the Strait of Hormuz, a critical choke point that Iran has strategically sought to control or constrict US naval movements through. But, as we've touched on before, Iran's plan to choke off the U.S. presence in this vital corridor ultimately unravel. Yet, what we see now may not be exactly what meets the eye. On the surface, America's intense barrage of Tomahawk missile strikes reads like a show of overwhelming military force aimed at crushing Iran's defenses. But, as Dr. Andreas Burr, a renowned Middle East expert based at Switzerland's University of St. Gallen, observes, this perception is only part of the story. He tells The Telegraph, compared to Donald Trump's big, beautiful armada, Iran's navy is more like a dwarf. Dr. Burr elaborates that Iran's naval strength has been severely eroded by years of sanctions, leaving its equipment outdated and its operational capabilities diminished. When it comes to the Air Force, the bulk of their aircraft date back to the Shah's era and are US-made, standing as relics rather than formidable assets. In other words, Iran's military may seem threatening in rhetoric and image, but in reality, its naval and aerial power are far weaker than it portrays. Therefore, the recent U.S. military strikes weren't primarily about turning Iran's military forces into a crippled state. Because, from a purely military standpoint, these forces never posed a significant direct threat to the U.S. So what was the real objective behind America's concentrated 48-hour strike spree? The key goal was to secure and expedite the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, which Iran had effectively sought to shut down in the immediate aftermath of the initial Operation Epic Fury's commencement. The U.S. and, indeed, much of the global economy relies heavily on this strait remaining open. This narrow waterway is one of the world's most essential transit routes. Though Iran's capability to launch a large-scale military assault against the U.S. might be limited, their strength lies in asymmetric warfare tactics. This dynamic is evident in the Strait of Hormuz, where shipping insurance premiums have skyrocketed, and companies are increasingly reluctant to send vessels through this choke point. To put it in perspective, The Guardian reports that roughly 20% of all crude oil shipments worldwide pass through the strait at some stage in their journey. Looking at specific regions, around 12.5% of all oil consumed by countries across the Americas transits this route, but its significance balloons massively for China, which receives about 45.7% of its oil via tankers navigating the Strait of Hormuz. This narrow stretch of water, therefore, represents a multi-billion-dollar industry on which the global energy market depends. Iran, recognizing this, has used its naval forces to exert pressure and wield the limited but strategic leverage it retains in this enduring conflict. Illustrating Iran's stance, Ibrahim Jabari, a senior advisor to the Commander-in-Chief of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, made a stark declaration on March 2nd. The strait is closed. If anyone tries to pass, the heroes of the Revolutionary Guard and the regular Navy will set those ships ablaze. Jabari went even further, warning of an impending campaign targeting oil pipelines, and predicted oil prices soaring to $200 per barrel. These inflammatory statements aim to underline Iran's asymmetric power and its potential to disrupt global energy supplies, signaling the high stakes and broader geopolitical chess game at play around this critical maritime corridor. There's a grain of truth in these claims, especially considering Iran's control over the Strait of Hormuz. Yet holding that control isn't just a matter of rhetoric. It demands a naval presence, even if it's mainly the fast attack boats that Iran typically deploys. However, the United States has recently neutralized those vessels, effectively removing them from the strategic picture. Despite these efforts, Iran's attempts to blockade the strait have seen some success so far. According to Capi Army, while several ships are now resorting to going dark to slip through unnoticed, the total number of transits passing through the strait has plummeted by 80%. This chokehold on passage has long been Iran's most potent geopolitical leverage, enabling them to inflict maximum disruption on global oil markets. Capi Army further notes that by stripping Iran of this leverage, the U.S. also extinguishes the last faint hope Tehran had of prevailing in this conflict. But you wouldn't get a clear picture if you listened solely to Iran's propaganda outlets. They've already broadcast bold claims like Iran unleashing a barrage of ballistic missiles against the USS Abraham Lincoln, a statement the U.S. swiftly dispelled by releasing photos showing the aircraft carrier fully operational and unharmed. Beyond that, Iran has reportedly launched about 400 missiles and deployed 1,000 drones, targeting Gulf states such as Qatar and the United Arab Emirates. Yet, as Capi Army points out, these numbers pale in comparison to the missile and drone strikes Iran unleashed following Operation Midnight Hammer in the summer of 2025. That earlier campaign, a joint U.S.-Israeli effort, devastated much of Iran's nuclear infrastructure. All signs suggest we're witnessing the last gasps of a regime desperately trying to project strength even as the foundation of its power crumbles. Iran's naval doctrine turned out to be disastrously flawed. Not only did it fail to foresee the possibility of the U.S. abandoning traditional anti-ship missiles in favor of alternative tactics, but when the U.S. adjusted just this piece of its strategy, Iran's fleet was quickly rendered defenseless. And the grim news for Iran doesn't stop there. The U.S. has only just begun its campaign. On March 2nd, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio told reporters plainly that what Iran is enduring now is just a fraction of the punishment that's yet to come. The most severe blows are still ahead, Rubio declared, emphasizing that the strikes launched so far were designed to dismantle the immediate threat Iran posed. Meanwhile, new fronts are erupting across the Middle East as Iran's proxies. Groups like the Houthis intensify their offensive operations. But for Iran's regime, the critical damage has already been inflicted on a navy that was once expected to offer stiff resistance, but instead folded rapidly. Tehran bet on understanding U.S. responses, only to see its naval doctrine shattered within a mere 48 hours. The U.S. is methodically erasing one of the few strategic advantages Iran held. Deep within Moscow, one individual watches these unfolding events with growing concern. Russian President Vladimir Putin. He's acutely aware that the dangers posed by Iran's regime extend far beyond its borders, casting a shadow over Russia's future. To understand the full story, Watch our detailed video exploring the origins of the conflict between the US and Iran and how it impacts Russia's geopolitical standing. If you find this content insightful, don't forget to subscribe to our channel to stay updated on all our latest videos.